Daegu, a city in southeastern part of South Korea, located in North Gyeongsang Province, is the third largest city in the country and an important industrial and commercial center. However, in mid-February 2003, it was the site of a horrific and catastrophic man-made disaster. On February 18, 2003, only half a month had passed since the Lunar New Year celebrations in Asia. The entire city of Daegu was bustling with crowds, and the festive atmosphere of the holiday still lingered everywhere. At 9:45 on this morning, Jong Yeon-nam was riding Daegu's Metro Line 1 on train number 1079. A few minutes later, he noticed a peculiar man nearby. The man appeared to be in his 50s, dressed in a blue tracksuit and carrying a plastic bottle. From the moment Jong Yeon-nam noticed him, the man was repeatedly twisting the cap of the plastic bottle. He would unscrew the cap, then close it again, and unscrew it once more. Then he took out a lighter, turned the flame to its maximum, and began repeatedly flicking it on and off. This strange behavior not only caught Jong Yeon-nam's attention, but also intrigued everyone else in the carriage. Soon, the train arrived at Jungang-no Station, which means the Central Road Station on Metro Line 1. This station is in the heart of Daegu, next to a large shopping center. It is the only transfer station between Line 1 and Line 2, and is also the second busiest platform in Daegu. Jong Yeon-nam was planning to get off at this station. Because he was so concerned about the strange man, Jong Yeon-nam turned to look back as he got off the train. However, what he saw became a scene he would never forget. The peculiar man lit the lighter in his hand and suddenly directed it towards the plastic bottle. With a loud bang, the area around the man was instantly engulfed in flames. Hello everyone, welcome to Cat's Archive. I'm Cat. Today we will be discussing one of the most horrific subway disasters in South Korea's history, the Daegu subway fire. At 9:53 a.m. on February 18th, train number 1079 arrived at the Central Road Station. 2 minutes later, another train, number 1080, traveling in the opposite direction, had just reached the previous station, Daegu Station. At this time, a mother named Lee Min-young was riding train number 1080 with her daughter. That morning, Lee Min-young planned to take her child to the hospital for treatment. After today's final treatment, the child will be able to take a break for a while. The child's condition had improved recently, and both of them were in good spirits that day. Lee Min-young even promised her daughter that after the treatment, they would go out for hamburgers. Train 1080 slowly pulled into the Central Road Station, and as it came to a stop, Lee Min-young felt something strange. She was not sure whether the train had arrived at the station. Normally, it would be very bright outside the windows when the train reached the station, but today it was pitch black outside. Lee Min-young looked out the window and saw that it was filled with black smoke. Soon, some of the smoke even began to seep into the carriage of train 1080. As she was still feeling confused by the scene in front of her, the train's announcement system suddenly came on. "Attention, passengers," the conductor's voice came through the speakers. "The Central Road Station is currently experiencing some issues. Please stay inside the carriages and do not move around. The train will depart shortly." Thinking that there might be a small fire somewhere, Lee Min-young didn't think much of it. Following the announcement, she stayed on the train with her daughter, patiently waiting for it to start moving again. However, it didn't take long for everyone on the train to sense that something was wrong. According to the announcement, the train was supposed to depart soon, but after waiting for several minutes, there were no signs that the train was going to move at all. As the smoke thickened, the lights inside the train began to flicker continuously. Not only were the lights malfunctioning, but the train doors were also opening and closing repeatedly. It seemed as if there was a problem with the entire train system. A few bold passengers took advantage of the open doors and squeezed out, but they quickly disappeared into the smoke. As time passed, the remaining passengers in the carriage grew increasingly anxious. They could only keep looking out the windows, hoping that someone would come and explain the situation. Through the billowing smoke outside, they could vaguely see another train on the opposite platform. That train seemed to have flames blazing from inside its carriages. Isn't anyone putting out the fire? Why isn't the train moving? Many people seeing the scene before them began to shout in panic. Amidst the chaos, there was a sudden click sound, and all the lights inside train 1080 instantly went out. The doors also slammed shut tightly. "Power's out!" someone exclaimed. The train car instantly descended into chaos. Passengers had no idea what was happening, but realized that the situation was spiraling out of control. Everyone began running around the carriage, trying to find an exit. Many people fell in the panic, and before they could get back up, they were trampled by those behind them, their screams echoing through the darkness. However, this was not the worst part. Even more terrifying was that the passengers only realized not only was the carriage pitch black, but the temperature seemed to be rising steadily. The entire train car felt like a giant steamer, becoming stifling hot, and breathing was becoming increasingly difficult. Sensing that something was terribly wrong, the passengers who were standing began to desperately push toward the doors. Even among them were some very strong and young men, but to their despair, they found that no matter how hard they tried, the doors wouldn't budge. The subway doors had been locked shut. At 9:55 a.m. on February the 18th, 2003, inside the Daegu Fire Department, some staff members were routinely preparing their firefighting equipment for the day. Some were drinking coffee to refresh, and others were doing some cleanups. The Lunar New Year had just passed, and the firefighters were relieved that no serious fire incidents had occurred at the beginning of the new year. Little did they know, at that moment, that in just a few minutes, they would face the greatest mental trauma of their lives. One minute later, at 9:56 a.m., the Daegu Fire Department began receiving a flood of emergency calls. In just over 10 minutes, the fire department received more than 130 calls. The first few callers were relatively composed, but as time went on, the later callers were almost hysterical with panic and despair. Even just through the voices, the operators could feel the chilling fear and the emergency of the situation. All the emergency calls pointed to the same place, the Central Road Station in Daegu's subway. Within minutes, every fire truck and ambulance in Daegu was mobilized and headed toward the Central Road Station. Centered around the Central Road Station, almost everyone in the entire Daegu city area could see the black smoke billowing like a tornado. The thick smoke nearly covered half of the sky. By the time the fire trucks arrived at the scene, the traffic in the areas around the Central Road Station had already come to a standstill. The firefighters quickly got out of their trucks and organized their equipment. However, as they prepared to enter the subway station, they were all stunned. The entrance to the Central Road Station was engulfed in thick smoke, with nearly zero visibility. Apart from the faint sound of burning, they couldn't hear any cries for help. They had no way of knowing or even roughly estimating how many people were trapped inside or how many were still alive. The Central Road Station in Daegu was designed with 3 underground levels, The first level housed a shopping street, the second level was the waiting area, and the third level was the platform where the incident occurred. At 10:02, after a brief discussion with the subway staff on the surface, the firefighters formed groups of 2 to 3 and began descending underground to start a rescue operation for survivors. Meanwhile, the ground crew of the fire department started deploying hoses and working to extract the toxic fumes from the station. Because the subway was completely covered in thick smoke, the firefighters had to navigate in nearly zero visibility by feeling their way along the floor to gradually enter the underground area. As they made their way through the first level, one of them suddenly tripped over something. The lead firefighter reached down to feel what had caused the obstruction, only to realize that it wasn't an obstacle item, but people lying sprawled across the ground. These people had collapsed while trying to escape, having inhaled large amounts of toxic smoke. Each time a firefighter found someone, they quickly carried them out of the station. The 3 levels of the subway station were almost completely enclosed spaces. Despite their heavy firefighting gear, the firefighters could feel the rising temperatures. Some of them were even burned all over their bodies, but they ignored the pain and continued to rescue the injured, carrying them out one after another. Thanks to their effort, many people who had collapsed on the first level were rescued. After just 8 minutes at 10:10, the firefighting teams began advancing to the second underground level. There, they discovered even more victims lying on the ground. Particularly when they searched near a rolling shutter door, many firefighters tripped and fell. Upon getting up, they realized that this area was densely covered with people lying on the ground. The shutter door was covered in handprints and footprints, and there was even a small hole scratched into the door by someone's fingernails, as if they had been desperately trying to breathe through it. All these people were already dead when they were found. It seemed that while trying to escape, they had lost their visibility and were blocked by the door in the darkness. In the end, they all perished in despair. 10 minutes later, at 10:20, the firefighters, after painstakingly searching, finally found the entrance to the third underground level. However, the temperature on the third level was extremely high. Despite several attempts to push through, even with their heavy firefighting gear, they were forced to retreat each time. As time ticked by, the temperature throughout the third levels kept rising. Something was still continuously burning. A sense of desperation gradually settled in the hearts of all the firefighters as they realized that no living thing could survive on the third underground level. At 11 a.m., after nearly 2 hours of relentless water spraying to cool down the area, the fire department finally managed to enter the third level. According to the recollections of the firefighters on site, as they entered, the only one thought that kept repeating in their minds was, "This is truly a living hell." At this moment, the third underground level was completely burned down and turned into a wasteland. They found 2 parallel subway trains at the station platform. Both of them were burnt gray. In train number 1079, the passengers had already evacuated. Do you remember we just mentioned that the doors of train 1080 were locked shut? When the firefighters reached train 1080, they had barely taken a few steps before their legs turned to jelly in horror. They saw numerous irregular, unidentifiable objects near the train doors and seats. Upon taking a closer look, they realized that all these unidentifiable objects were human remains. The area around the doors was particularly horrifying. The densely packed bodies had been roasted and fused together by the intense heat, forming a gruesome heap that weighed at least 5 tons. These people had been burnt alive inside the carriages. Some of the firefighters whose nerves weren't as strong were so paralyzed with fear that they nearly passed out. If there is a hell on earth, it would surely look like this. At 1:40 p.m. on February 18th, the fire was finally extinguished. According to later estimates by the staff, there were approximately 500 people in the Central Road station when the fire broke out, but only over 200 were rescued. The identifiable casualties were all concentrated on the first and second levels. As for the victims on the third level, their bodies were so severely damaged by the intense heat that they were fused together, making it nearly impossible to identify any of them. Even DNA testing was not feasible, and identification could only be made through personal belongings that hadn't been completely destroyed. That afternoon, the police posted a list of known victims on one of the walls in the subway station. Many people gathered at the station. Some people saw the names of their relatives on the list and just collapsed to the ground, sobbing so hard that they nearly fainted. The rest could only hold up missing person notices in the streets, waiting to claim the bodies from the third level. Many family members, upon reaching the third level, were so devastated by what they saw that they crumpled to the ground in agony. The entire Central Road station was filled with cries of grief and despair. Returning to the case, how did the fire start, and why did it result in such severe consequences? Why were there no fatalities on train 1079, where the incident began, while the opposite train 1080 was filled with bodies? After an investigation, the police quickly uncovered the truth behind the incident. It was an arson attack. The suspect, Kim Dae-han, was 56 years old at the time. He didn't perish in the fire, but did suffer some burns. Terrified by what he had done, he fled to a hospital for treatment, where he was eventually arrested by the police. As the police interrogated Kim Dae-han and examined the scene, an absurd and almost unbelievable truth began to emerge. Kim Dae-han was once a taxi driver. In 2001, he suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed and was ultimately diagnosed with a second-degree physical disability. Unable to accept his condition, he developed severe depression and gradually harbored thoughts of revenge against society. On the morning of February 18, 2003, after being tormented by depression for nearly 2 years, Kim Dae-han thought, "If I am going to die, I would as well take everyone with me." With this thought in mind, he filled a shampoo bottle with gasoline and boarded train 1079 at Songhyun Station on Daegu's Metro Line 1, heading toward Daegok Station. He planned to carry out his vengeful scheme by setting the train on fire. Due to extreme nervousness, Kim Dae-han repeatedly lit his lighter after boarding the train, which attracted attention of many nearby passengers. At 9:53 a.m., when the train arrived at the Central Road station, his emotions erupted and he used his lighter to ignite the plastic bottle filled with gasoline. This action ultimately led to the horrific tragedy. Kim Dae-han had only about 2 liters of gasoline in the shampoo bottle, which typically would not cause such a severe fire. However, at that time, South Korea's subway fire safety regulations were extremely simplistic and basic, consisting of just one sentence: use non-flammable materials, with no other actionable details. The supplier for the Daegu subway was a well-known heavy industrial group. At the time, they did have flame retardant technology. However, in the 1990s, they secured the Daegu subway project by bidding at the lowest price. It was an ultra-low bid. The subway trains sold to Daegu were priced at around 500 million won each. In contrast, the trains sold to Hong Kong and Europe during the same period were priced at around 1.8 billion won each. The cost savings came from cutting corners on flame retardant materials. The investigation team discovered that the subway trains purchased for the Daegu Metro were made entirely of flammable materials. The most shocking detail was that the seats were covered with velvet, an incredibly flammable fabric. At 9:53 a.m. on February 18th, as train 1079 pulled into the station and opened its doors, the culprit, Kim Dae-han, ignited the gasoline inside the carriage. The gasoline instantly set the floor beneath him on fire, and within a short time, the flames spread to the seats. The velvet-covered seats caught fire immediately and began to burn fiercely. Upon igniting the gasoline, Kim Dae-han did not stay at the scene waiting for death. Overwhelmed by the fire he had started, he fled in panic. At this moment, the conductor of train 1079 immediately grabbed a fire extinguisher to try to put out the flames. However, the seats burned so quickly that he couldn't contain the blaze. Within just 1 minute, the flames had consumed the entire carriage. The intense fire from train 1079 produced a large amount of black smoke, which began to spread throughout the platform. The situation quickly escalated and became out of control. At 9:54, the conductor realized that the fire was unstoppable and was completely paralyzed with fear. He should have immediately taken actions to help evacuate all the passengers on the platform. But instead, he neither raised the alarm nor made any announcements. He simply fled upstairs along with the other passengers. Now, let's shift our perspective to the subway control room. The surveillance footage showed Kim Dae-han igniting the gasoline at 9:53. Passengers immediately started to panic and flee. This scene continued for 2 minutes. But strangely, the 3 staff members on duty in the control room that morning claimed they did not see the fire on the monitors. The fire alarm system in the control room kept sounding and warning messages popped up on the computer screens. However, the 3 staff members dismissed this as false alarms. It wasn't until the fire had continued to burn for another 3 minutes that they realized the subway was indeed on fire and began calling the fire department. The supervisor of the control room later explained that since train 1079 had already arrived at the station, they had shifted their attention to monitoring other trains. However, this still does not explain why they failed to take the fire alarm system's warnings seriously. At 9:55, the fire on train 1079 had grown so large that it was beyond control, and most passengers had already escaped. Meanwhile, train 1080 had just arrived at Daegu-yong Station, the station before the Central Road Station. If train 1080 had stopped there, the subsequent tragedy could have been avoided. However, due to the heavy smoke at the Central Road Station, the monitors in the control room were obscured. The 3 staff members still believed it was only a minor fire. Therefore, they issued the following announcement to all trains. Attention, please proceed with caution when entering the Central Road Station. There is a fire at the station. These announcements ultimately opened the gates to a hellish nightmare. At 9:56, after receiving the report from the control room, train 1080 began approaching the Central Road Station. Before the train even entered the station, the conductor Choi Sang-yong noticed a cloud of black smoke. Upon arriving at the station, he also realized that the voltage for train 1080 was becoming extremely unstable. As soon as the train arrived, it could no longer restart. Choi Sang-yong urgently radioed the control room, but the response he received was, We are currently working on restoring power. Once it's restored, you will be able to leave." To prevent the thick smoke outside from spreading into the train and to avoid passengers getting injured in a panic, Choi Sang-yo decided to close the doors and wait for the power to be restored before departing. He broadcasted an announcement to the passengers, instructing them to stay inside the carriages and wait. Since the windows were completely covered by black smoke, the passengers on the train had no idea what was happening outside. Hearing the conductor's announcement that the train would depart shortly, they quietly waited inside. Meanwhile, the adjacent train 1079 was engulfed in flames, and the entire third level of the Central Road Station had turned into a blazing inferno. As the fire grew, it began to consume the surrounding electrical systems on the platform. The flames were now aggressively advancing towards train 1080. Inside the train 80, the power was erratic, with the doors opening and closing repeatedly and the lights continuously flickering, refusing to return to normal. This process lasted for more than 10 minutes, from 9:57 to 10:09. During this time, conductor Choi Sang-yo continued discussing with the staff in the control room, trying to identify the problem. Choi still believed the train could be restarted, so he repeatedly made announcements to calm the passengers, asking them to remain patient and wait for the train to resume operations. However, instead of the train returning to normal, everyone waited only to find that the train 1080 had completely lost power. The control room, which had been communicating with Choi, suddenly found they could no longer reach him through the usual equipment. Realized that the situation was likely heading towards an irreparable direction, they quickly called Choi on his mobile phone, urging him to evacuate the passengers immediately. But with the train completely losing power, it could no longer broadcast any announcements. At 10:10, the conductor Choi Sang-yo realized the situation was extremely perilous. If he didn't escape immediately, the consequence would be dire. In a panic, Choi Sang-yo didn't consider the passengers still on the train. He pulled out the master control key, jumped off the train, and ran. Once the master control key is removed, all systems on the train shut down, causing the doors to automatically close and lock. As the lights went out and doors closed, it was clear that the train could no longer be restarted. Sensing that something was wrong, the passengers became frantic. Soon, everyone started running towards the doors in stampede. However, when they reached the doors, they found that the previously malfunctioning doors were now completely locked. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't open them. All the passengers who didn't escape in time were trapped inside the carriages. One notable exception was carriage 4, where another conductor happened to be a passenger on the train. He found the emergency button under the seat and manually pried the door open. Thanks to him, over 60 passengers in that carriage were able to escape. However, by this time, the optimal escape window had long passed. The entire Central Road Station was engulfed in smoke and flames, making it impossible to see, let alone breathe. The evacuees couldn't discern the escape route. Some passengers crawled into the subway tunnels, while others made their way to the second underground level by memory. Some people who reached the second level thought they had found a way out, but they were met with a shutter door that a staff member had closed earlier that day. Many were blocked by this door, and due to the thick smoke and intense heat, they quickly succumbed to exhaustion and collapsed, never to rise again. Those who were still trapped inside the carriages met an even more tragic fate. The structure of the subway station created a sealed and high-temperature environment. The tunnels on either side continually supplied air, which fueled the flames, causing the fire to burn more intensely until it consumed everything flammable. The entire subway station was like a scene from hell, and those trapped inside were slowly roasted to death by the flames, reduced to charred remains. A few days after the disaster, the relevant authorities finally confirmed that the horrific fire had resulted in 192 deaths and 151 injuries, making it the deadliest subway disaster in South Korean history. The tragedy was caused by a combination of severely flawed hardware, inadequate fire safety measures, and improper emergency response procedures. All these hidden dangers were ignited by Kim Dae-han's lighter and 2 liters of gasoline, culminating in an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. On February 19th, the day after the disaster, a 200-member military unit arrived at the scene to conduct cleanup operations. In the name of quickly resuming services, they used shovels and brooms to swiftly clean the entire Central Road station. All the ashes were swept away, and the area was finally washed down with water. Tragically, many of the items they shoveled away included the personal belongings and remains of the victims. On that day, many relatives of the victims were still waiting to claim their loved ones' belongings. However, a few hours later, they learned that many of the remains and personal items had already been discarded into the trash. Although many belongings were eventually recovered, a large number of remains had been severely damaged, which undoubtedly inflicted a second wave of emotional trauma on the relatives of the victims. In January 2004, the Daegu High Court sentenced Kim Dae-han to life imprisonment. The conductor of Train 1080 received a 5-year prison sentence, while the conductor of Train 1079 was sentenced to 4 years in prison. The 3 control room managers and 4 on-site staff members were given various sentences, ranging from probation to 3 years in prison. However, the suppliers involved in the incident were not convicted. Both the sentencing outcomes and the military's actions in cleaning the site sparked intense protests from the South Korean public. Many of the convicted staff members received imprisonment sentences that often involved confinement without mandatory labor, which is considered a relatively lenient form of punishment. Train 1080 conductor Choi Sang-yo disappeared for 11 hours immediately following the incident. During this time, he attended multiple meetings with high-ranking officials of the subway system. This led many to suspect that the convicted staff members were merely scapegoats, taking the fall for the higher-ups. A few days after the incident, the authorities held a rare and sorrowful exhibition at the disaster site. They organized 678 items of the personal belongings and over 4,000 photographs for the relatives of the victims to identify. The relatives, who still held on to a glimmer of hope, were utterly devastated when they saw the belongings. Some victims sent final messages to their loved ones before they died. These messages were their last records in this world and had become indelible scars in the hearts of their families. On February 19th, as one of the first family members to claim remains, Jung Jae-young found his daughter's necklace and his wife Lee Mi-young's wedding watch. Judging by the condition of the bodies, it appeared that the mother and daughter had given up hope of survival. Instead of crowding near the subway doors, they remained in their seats, holding each other. Underneath Lee Mi-young's body, rescuers found her daughter, whom she had desperately tried to shield and protect. Jung Jae-young recalled that on that morning, his wife told him to sleep a bit longer while she took their daughter to the hospital. He never expected that when he woke up, his wife and daughter would both be gone. He often thought about how terrified they must have been as the subway burned, and how they might have been thinking of him, hoping he could save them until their last moments. Every time he thought of this, Zhang Zhiyang would break down completely. Just a year and a half later, in August 2004, Kim Dae-han died in prison due to illness. That same year, the local government and related suppliers compensated the victims' families. Following this, the South Korean government invested heavily to replace all subway materials nationwide with non-flammable or flame-retardant alternatives. The relevant authorities also established more comprehensive fire safety regulations, installed emergency lighting in tunnels, and implemented strict checks on liquids brought onto subways. Subway regulations worldwide had become more stringent due to this event. In 2015, a memorial space was built on the second underground level of the Central Road Station in Daegu. This space displays remnants of the disaster and many photographs of the victims. In a corner of the memorial, an inscription reads, "May we remember this disaster and never let such a tragedy happen again." Alright, that's it for this episode. I'm Kat. If you enjoy my content, remember to subscribe to Kat's Archive. I will be sharing more stories about historical events and unsolved mysteries. See you next time. Bye bye. The Karma-Duben mountain range is located in the southern part of Lake Baikal in Russia. The range stretches for 420 kilometers, is 65 kilometers wide, and reaches a maximum altitude of 2,396 meters. Apart from the summer, the mountains were covered in snow all year round. Close to Lake Baikal, this region offers stunning scenery, with majestic snow-capped peaks attracting countless hiking and mountaineering enthusiasts. It is also considered one of the most beautiful places in Siberia. However, in this beautiful place, a bizarre and tragic mountain incident occurred, widely believed to be a supernatural event. The details of this incident were once highly classified by the Russian government. Hello everyone, this is Kat's Archive, and I'm Kat. Join me as we delve into this mysterious mountain tragedy and explore why so many believe it to be a supernatural event. Morino is a small town built around the train station. It is close to Lake Baikal and situated to the north of the Karma-Duben mountain range. On Sunday, August 1st, 1993, many hikers gathered in this town. They were all eager to take advantage of the summer thaw and set out to climb the Karma-Duben mountains. Among them was our group of protagonists, a bunch of young people from Kazakhstan. This mountaineering team from Kazakhstan consisted of 7 people. Their leader was a 41-year-old teacher named Ludmila Korovina, a seasoned hiker and mountaineering expert, and the head of an outdoor club. Korovina had been awarded the title of Master of Sports by the Soviet Union, earning the deep trust of her students' parents. During the summer holidays, parents would entrust their children to her to learn wilderness survival skills. This time, the mountaineering team came to the Karma-Duben mountain range to undertake a week-long hiking expedition. Most members of the team were students from the school's mountaineering club, including 3 boys and 3 girls. The youngest was 15 years old, and the oldest was 24. The 3 boys were 23-year-old Alexander Krysin, 19-year-old Denis Shrushkin, and 15-year-old Timur Bapanov. Alexander, a 25-year-old student from Moscow State University of Technology, had been participating in various hiking and mountaineering clubs since the age of 12. He was the strongest and most physically fit member of the team. Alexander was also a child Korovina had seen grow up. Shortly before deciding to join the expedition, Alexander proposed to Korovina's daughter. Korovina was very fond of Alexander and had long considered him her prospective son-in-law. Denis, a 19-year-old, originally wasn't part of this climbing team. he got the opportunity to join the expedition because a student dropped out at the last minute. It's worth noting that Dennis decided to participate in the climb without his parents' permission. At the time, his parents were on vacation, so Dennis left a note at home saying, "I'm going mountain climbing, we'll be back soon." Timur, a 15-year-old born into a family of mountaineers, had been hiking and climbing with his family since he was very young. He was a passionate enthusiast of mountaineering activities and would always join any expedition organized by Korovina. Now let's take a look at the situation with the girls in the team. The three girls were 24-year-old Tatiana Filipenko, 17-year-old Valentina Utochenko, and 16-year-old Victoria Zelentsova. Among them, Valentina played a crucial role in the events that unfolded. Tatiana, 24 years old, had just graduated from university and was working as a secretary at a college. In her spare time, she didn't enjoy going to bars or shopping. Instead, she had a deep passion for hiking and mountaineering, especially long-distance expeditions. Valentina, 17, was studying at university in Kazakhstan, majoring in sports tourism. Her future plan was to become an excellent mountaineering club instructor, just like their leader, Korovina. Victoria, 16, had a history of breaking down and crying due to exhaustion during a previous mountaineering activity, which had led to a temper tantrum. Korovina was very displeased with such behavior and initially refused to let Victoria join this expedition. However, Victoria had a strong desire to hike in the Karma Daban Mountains and had long dreamed of this adventure. She pleaded with her mother to call Korovina, and after repeatedly promising that she wouldn't lose her temper again, Korovina finally allowed Victoria to join the team. A year ago, Korovina had led her team on a challenging trek through the Tian Shan Mountains. The chosen route in the Tian Shan was quite difficult, requiring climbers to frequently use ropes and a variety of mixed climbing techniques. For this expedition in the Karma Daban Mountains, Korovina decided to lower the difficulty level and avoid such a strenuous path. She selected a route that circled the Karma Daban Mountains, ultimately leading to Sliwudyanka. This route spanned a total of 230 kilometers and likely wouldn't require the use of climbing ropes. For a team that had successfully completed the rigorous trek in the Tian Shan Mountains, this journey seemed much more relaxed. The group was brimming with confidence, treating this trek as more of a sightseeing adventure rather than a challenging expedition. At the same time, there were many other teams entering the mountains, including one led by Korovina's 16-year-old daughter, Natalia. Natalia's team chose a more complex route, so the two groups were not traveling the same path. However, they agreed to meet midway at Lake Patavoy Ozero, and then complete the rest of the journey together. Korovina's confidence in allowing her daughter to lead a team into the mountains on her own indicated their familiarity with the chosen routes. This also demonstrated their assurance in successfully completing the journey, reflecting the extensive experience and preparation that both Korovina and her daughter possessed. Before departure, Korovina called the local meteorological station to confirm the weather conditions for the next 7 days in the Karma Daban Mountains. The staff on duty informed Korovina that the weather would be clear and sunny for the entire week, with no expected rainfall. On August 2, 1993, the two teams officially set off. The initial part of the journey went smoothly, with the team members enjoying the scenic views along the way and occasionally stopping to take photos. Before long, the two teams separated. Natalia's team would cross through the heart of the mountain range, heading directly towards the meeting point at Lake Patavoy Ozero. Meanwhile, Korovina's team took a simpler route, bypassing the mountain's interior and moving towards their destination on an easier path. As the two teams parted ways, Korovina repeatedly reminded her daughter to stay safe. Natalia, slightly impatient, assured her mother that she would be careful and then headed towards the heart of the mountain range. No one could have known that this would be the last time the mother and the daughter would see each other. After bidding farewell to her daughter, Korovina led her team forward along their predetermined route. Along the way, they would pass a place called Perevo-Lenguteyski Vorota, roughly the midway point from Marino to the designated meeting spot. After passing Perevo, they would ascend Mountain Canula, which stands at an elevation of 2,371 meters. Once they crossed this mountain, they would soon reach Lake Patavoy Ozero. A few days later, just as they entered Perevo, Korovina and her team noticed that it had started to drizzle. They thought the weather forecast might have been wrong, a possible occurrence in the unpredictable climate of mountainous regions. However, they were well prepared, each carrying a raincoat. After putting on their raincoats, they continued their journey. This minor setback was hardly an issue for such an experienced mountaineering team. In addition to their raincoats, everyone had brought a set of thick sweaters. To prevent the sweaters from getting wet, they had packed them in waterproof bags ahead of time. Their preparations were thorough, ensuring they had a plan to deal with any sudden drops in temperature. After crossing Perevo, the team began their ascent of Mountain Canula. By noon, Korovina's mountaineering team had reached an altitude of 2,000 meters. From this vantage point, they could see a vast expanse of mountains and grasslands, offering breathtaking views. However, the rain on the mountain was intensifying, accompanied by thunderstorms and strong winds. They needed to quickly cross the ridge and reach the forested area ahead, where the dense trees could provide shelter from the storm. The rain-soaked path was becoming increasingly muddy, making their progress more difficult. The team's pace slowed significantly compared to their original climbing plan. By 4 p.m., they had reached an altitude of 2,310 meters. They were very close to the summit. Just a bit further, and they could be over the top. Everyone rallied their spirits and pushed forward, determined to reach the summit. After a few more kilometers, the sky began to darken. The team's pace slowed further as the members started to feel exhausted. The temperature was around 10 degrees Celsius. Although it didn't feel extremely cold, the rain-soaked clothes were causing them to lose body heat rapidly. Korovina understood that if they continued like this, the team could be in danger. She decided to have everyone set up camp on the spot and spend the night on the mountain. They would rest and resume their journey at dawn after regaining their strength. But no one could have foreseen that this decision would lead to a tragic outcome for the entire mountaineering team. No one anticipated the disaster that was about to unfold. Let's shift our perspective to Korovina's 16-year-old daughter, Natalia. The next day, Natalia's team had successfully reached Lake Patavoy Ozero, the agreed meeting point. Seeing that her mother hadn't yet arrived, Natalia decided to wait for them. As time passed, Natalia's team waited there for 2 full days, but there was no sign of her mother Korovina or her fiancé Alexander. Despite her mother's extensive mountaineering experience, Natalia couldn't help but worry. Natalia discussed with her teammates the possibility of waiting a bit longer. However, there were dissenting voices within the group as their supplies were limited. If they continued to wait and run out of food, they would face their own danger. Reluctantly, Natalia had to lead her team away. However, she couldn't stop worrying about her mother and fiancé, who had yet to arrive. She kept imagining that they were just a short distance away and would catch up with them soon. 16 days after their departure, on August 18th, Natalia successfully led her team to the destination, Sliwudyanka. However, her mother never arrived. This was entirely out of character for Korovina, who had never failed to reach her destination on time before. Natalia felt a deep sense of unease. For a professional mountaineer like her mother not to arrive as planned, something must have gone terribly wrong. Realizing this, Natalia immediately reported her mother's team missing to the local rescue department. However, due to adverse weather conditions, the rescue department did not initiate a search and rescue operation immediately. It wasn't until 3 days later, on August 21st, that a helicopter finally took off to begin the search in the Karma Daban Mountains. By August 24th, 19 days had passed since Korovina and her team went missing. The rescue team's helicopter finally located the bodies of Korovina and 5 other team members not far from the summit of Mountain Canula. However, one team member, Valentina, who we previously mentioned as a key figure, was still missing. Forensic investigation revealed that Korovina died of sudden cardiac arrest, while the remaining 5 team members succumbed to hypothermia. Additionally, all 6 individuals were found to be malnourished, with their livers and muscles lacking glycogen, indicating organ failure. No one could have imagined that such a beautiful mountain range would witness such a severe tragedy. The incident quickly drew widespread attention from the media and the public. Up to this point, one team member, Valentina, was still missing. Theoretically, she might still be alive. Consequently, various media outlets began searching for Valentina, believing that finding her would provide crucial insights into the entire incident. The influence of the media proved to be immense. A few days later, Valentina was indeed found in a hospital room, severely injured. The media quickly descended upon her, eager to ask her what exactly had happened on the mountain. During the interview, Valentina hesitantly began to recount the events of those fateful days. In August, the Karma Daban Mountains were in the midst of summer, and the temperatures in the mountains weren't particularly low. On the day of the incident, Korovina led her group of 7 to Mountain Canula. As they prepared to reach the summit, darkness began to fall, and everyone was exhausted. Korovina decided that it would be best for everyone to set up camp where they were and rest for the night. However, the weather conditions were terrible. At 4 a.m., strong winds tore open the vent of their tent, allowing rain like small stones to pour in through the gap. Several male team members quickly used their sleeping bags to block the opening, while the others hurriedly tried to dry the rainwater. They held on until around 6 a.m., when the wind finally began to subside. Unfortunately, all the sleeping bags were soaked, leaving them damp and heavy. Some team members, weakened by the cold and wet conditions, began to show symptoms of nausea and vomiting. Everyone knew that they couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. After a quick breakfast, they started to pack up their gear. Around 10 a.m., the team began their descent. To their surprise, snowflakes started to fall from the sky, and the temperature dropped sharply. Although everyone had some mountaineering experience, they had never faced such harsh weather conditions. Even the boys in the group couldn't help but complain about being wet, cold, and unable to find any landmarks, feeling completely lost and disoriented. At this point, Korovina quickly reassured everyone that despite enduring 3 days of heavy rain, they should be fine as long as they stuck to their original plan to descend the mountain. However, no one could have anticipated the imminent danger. The team's fittest member, Alexander, suddenly fell while they were moving. After being helped up by his companions, he appeared unsteady and unable to walk properly, eventually collapsing and losing consciousness. Realizing something was seriously wrong, Korovina decided to have the 2 other male team members lead the rest of the group forward, while she stayed behind to tend to Alexander. The 5 team members continued in the predetermined direction, but they hadn't gone far when they suddenly heard Korovina shouting for help from behind. Hearing the cries for help, the team quickly turned back. By the time they returned, Alexander had regained consciousness, but was curled up on the ground, convulsing and vomiting white foam. The 24-year-old team member Tatiana hurriedly set up a canopy, and the other team members rushed over to assist. Valentina and Korovina were attending to Alexander together. Suddenly, Alexander began to have a severe nosebleed that they couldn't stop, and his eyes, wide with terror, started bleeding as well. As they struggled to help him, Alexander's pupils began to dilate, and his face turned pale. Valentina could feel his body temperature dropping rapidly. Moments later, Korovina, with deep sorrow, announced that Alexander no longer had a pulse. Everyone was plunged into shock and grief. No one could have imagined that Alexander would lose his life in just a few minutes. While they were still reeling from the shock, 16-year-old Victoria suddenly sat down on the grass. They initially thought Victoria was just terrified and had collapsed. Just as Valentina went over to help her, Victoria suddenly sprang up and in a frenzy started biting Valentina's arm, growling and making guttural sounds, resembling someone having a rabies attack. Valentina, terrified, turned around to call for help from her companions. But what she saw next was even more horrifying. 24-year-old Tatiana was repeatedly smashing her head against a rock, as if trying to break it open. Meanwhile, 19-year-old Dennis had quickly hidden behind a large boulder and was desperately trying to crawl into his sleeping bag. It seemed as though everyone had been frightened by some terrifying unseen force. Valentina pushed Victoria away and ran towards Korovina. To her horror, she found that Korovina was now experiencing the same symptoms as Alexander, foaming at the mouth and convulsing on the ground. Nearby, she noticed another person lying on the ground. Upon closer inspection, she realized it was the youngest boy, Timur. Valentina tried to shake Timur awake, but no matter how hard she pushed, he didn't respond. It appeared that Timur had also lost his life. Terrified and in shock, Valentina suddenly felt a kick from Dennis, who shouted, "Hurry, get down the mountain." Valentina didn't have time to think. She grabbed her backpack and tumbled down the mountain. At first, Dennis was close behind her, but after a while, Valentina realized he had disappeared as well. It felt as though she had encountered some supernatural force. She had no idea what had just happened. In a matter of moments, all her companions had inexplicably fallen to the ground. Terrified that the same fate might befall her, she didn't dare to look back and kept running towards the forest. After a long while, Valentina finally regained her composure. Feeling a chill, she put on her spare sweater and crawled into her sleeping bag. She spent the entire day in a state of fear and cold, trying to stay warm and make sense of the terrifying events she had just experienced. The next morning, Valentina woke up from her troubled sleep. Now calmer, she quickly realized that she had no food supplies with her. After the terrifying events of the previous day, she was all alone and completely lost. She made a bold decision. To survive, she had to retrace her steps and return to the site of the incident to gather some food supplies. Upon returning to the site, Valentina saw that everyone remained in the same positions as the day before, confirming that none had survived. Without lingering, she quickly gathered a compass and some food from her fallen teammates. Then she began her solitary descent, determined to find help and ensure her survival. For 4 days and nights, Valentina wandered alone in the mountains. She eventually reached the Nesnaya River, but still saw no signs of human habitation. By this time, she began to feel unwell, with a fever and persistent dry cough, and her consciousness started to fade. Valentina feared that she might soon succumb to the same fate as her teammates. But she didn't want to leave this world in such a dirty state. Valentina, despite her physical discomfort, forced herself to crawl into the icy river water, intending to clean herself up before slowly embracing what she believed to be her imminent death. It was precisely this determination that saved her life. At that moment, she saw a kayak docked at the bend of the river. Valentina felt a surge of hope and, using the last of her strength, began shouting and waving her arms. Fortunately, the people in the kayak, a pair of tourists from Ukraine, saw Valentina. They paddled over and rescued the nearly lifeless Valentina, bringing her to safety. This was the entirety of Valentina's account. After her harrowing story was told, the media quickly picked it up, leading to widespread coverage. However, this also sparked more suspicion and curiosity about the incident. As people sought to learn more, Valentina suddenly disappeared without a trace. Even the hospital and her family had no idea where she had gone. The public has put forward various theories regarding this incident, including malnutrition, hypothermia, neurotoxins, poisonous mushrooms, and curses. Let's first discuss the theory that malnutrition caused the death. Previously, we mentioned that after the discovery of the 6 bodies, the forensic examination revealed that all the bodies showed signs of malnutrition. Yuri Golias, the deputy leader of the rescue team, was interviewed and stated that he had known the leader Korovina for a long time. He described Korovina as a very strict person. He recounted an incident when he encountered Korovina north of Lake Baikal. At that time, Korovina was accompanied by 2 boys who appeared to be around 16 years old. These boys looked extremely exhausted. One of them was so weak that he could barely walk and couldn't even lift the machete used for clearing the path. Seeing the boys, Yuri quickly gave them bread and milk. The boys devoured the food like starving tigers, as if they hadn't eaten in days. Korovina, however, remained calm and mentioned that she planned to open a survival school to teach children how to survive in the wild. She also said that in the future expeditions, she intended to bring minimal clothing and food to toughen their willpower. Yuri was very angry when he heard this, believing that Korovina was mistreating the children. During the search at the incident site, Yuri saw a similar situation. They found only an empty meat can. Yuri suspected that Korovina might have forced the children to share this single can of meat on the windy and rainy mountaintop. He had hoped to find traces of other food remnants during the search, but unfortunately, there was only this empty can. Yuri believed that, based on the analysis of the victim's causes of death and the conditions at the scene, it was highly likely that Korovina's obsessive survival philosophy led to this tragedy. The media also intended to interview Valentina to verify this perspective. However, as we mentioned earlier, Valentina seemed to have vanished without a trace, and no one could locate her. The second theory is that the deaths were caused by hypothermia. Regarding the forensic analysis that the team members died due to hypothermia, the rescue personnel on the scene indeed observed similar conditions. When the victims' bodies were found, 3 of them had torn off their outer clothing and were only wearing thin underwear, while 2 others were barefoot, appearing as if they were very hot. Although this seems contrary to the cold-induced hypothermia, this condition actually aligns with the symptoms of it. When the human body's temperature drops below 32 degrees Celsius, the hypothalamus, which regulates body temperature, becomes confused and sends out false signals of being overheated. As a result, people can uncomfortably start to strip off their clothes to cool down. However, the conclusion of hypothermia left people even more puzzled. According to the rescue personnel, the victims' backpacks contained dry spare sweaters that they could have worn to stay warm and prevent hypothermia, but they didn't. Moreover, the team had experienced the leader, Korovina, who, along with her daughter, was very familiar with the Karmadeban Mountains. Just a 30-minute walk from their campsite was a sheltered area, a wind-protected campsite. So why did Korovina choose not to go there to set up camp? This raised further questions about the circumstances leading to the tragedy and why such an experienced team failed to take seemingly obvious precautions. In summary, considering the above evidence, people began to question the theory that hypothermia was the cause of death. At this point, a third, bolder hypothesis emerged. The mountaineering team might have been affected by neurotoxins. Based on Valentina's account, several of the deceased exhibited symptoms such as foaming at the mouth, convulsions, and even bleeding from the nose and eyes. These symptoms closely resemble those caused by neurotoxins. Korovina's sudden cardiac arrest also aligns with this hypothesis. Coincidentally, the Soviet Union began developing a neurotoxin called Novichok in 1971. The symptoms caused by this chemical weapon closely match those observed in several of the victims. Moreover, production of this neurotoxin ceased in 1993, the year of the incident. Proponents of this theory believe that the government was conducting final experiments in the mountains, which led to a leak of neurotoxin. However, the Karma Daban Mountains were in peak tourist season at the time. Opponents of the neurotoxin theory argue that the Soviet military would not conduct experiments in such a popular area. Additionally, if neurotoxins were involved, why wasn't Valentina affected? Later, upon further investigation, it was discovered that this type of neurotoxin is water-soluble and can take up to 4 months to degrade in the natural environment. If this were the case, the timing and location of the military experiments might not necessarily coincide with the mountaineering team's presence. It is possible that the military conducted experiments in the mountains 4 months earlier, and subsequent heavy rains and strong winds transported the neurotoxin to the area where the mountaineers were. Once the sun came out and heated the soil, the toxins could have vaporized, causing the team members to be poisoned. This hypothesis also explains why Alexander only showed symptoms after falling. Apart from Valentina, some members were sitting on the ground or hiding behind rocks, giving them more exposure to the toxins in the soil. Valentina, on the other hand, was continuously moving during the poisoning process, which may have prevented her from being as deeply affected by the toxins as the others. At the same time, this hypothesis also provides a plausible explanation for why Valentina disappeared after being rescued. It's possible that she was taken by security agencies and made to sign a confidentiality agreement, preventing her from sharing further details about the incident. The fourth hypothesis is accidental poisoning from consuming toxic mushrooms. Valentina mentioned that the team members, following Korovina's instructions, were collecting a rare high-altitude plant along their journey. Their extended stay at high altitudes was due to their busy efforts in gathering this plant. Indeed, the rescue team later found large quantities of this plant in the victims' backpacks. Valentina also stated that she survived her escape by consuming this plant along the way. It's possible that some team members accidentally mixed poisonous mushrooms with the plants they were collecting. The next morning during breakfast, they may have mistakenly eaten the toxic mushrooms, leading to collective poisoning. This hypothesis aligns with the survivors' descriptions of behaviors such as head banging against rocks and frenzied biting. However, this theory has its flaws. If the poisoning occurred during breakfast, it doesn't explain why Valentina survived. Since she ate the same plants to stay alive during her escape, she should have also been affected if the plants were indeed mixed with toxic mushrooms. This inconsistency raises questions about the validity of this hypothesis. The fifth and most chilling hypothesis is that of a curse. This theory was put forward by Yuri, the deputy leader of the search team. Yuri believed that the tragedy might have been caused by a shamanic curse related to the plants the mountaineering team was collecting. These plants were considered sacred by the local Mongolian people, who viewed them as a gift from the heavens. According to their beliefs, humans shouldn't greedily harvest these plants, and certainly not for commercial purposes. Valentina's account mentioned that the team had been continuously gathering this sacred plant while on the mountain. Yuri theorized that this act of greed and disrespect towards the sacred gift had invoked a curse from the heavens, resulting in the tragic fate that befell the team. In fact, for the local Mongolian people, the mountaineering team's accident in the Karma Daban Mountains was not surprising. In the Mongolian language, Karma Daban means terrible rocks. The area even had ancient altars used for sacrifices. To the local people, the Karma Daban Mountains were not a beautiful tourist destination, but rather a sacred and ominous place of worship. These 5 theories represent the main speculations about the incident. However, none of these theories can be confirmed, and the only eyewitness, Valentina, has disappeared. As a result, this mountaineering tragedy remains a mystery, and what truly happened to the team on that fateful expedition is something no one will ever know. Until 2019, when Valentina and Korovina's daughter Natalia appeared together on a television program, they commemorated the tragic event and shared their memories of the mountaineering disaster. During this interview, Natalia provided additional details about the incident. Before the mountaineering expedition began, local residents had warned the team, saying, "This year the mountains are very unusual. A huge brown bear has been frequently spotted. It even attempted to intercept passing trains." The implication was that the mountains were unsafe and that the team should consider canceling their climb. However, the mountaineering team did not heed this warning. After entering the mountains, Natalia frequently saw a huge elk appearing and disappearing in the forest. This elk seemed to follow the mountaineering team along their route, causing them to take a long detour at one point. Later, as the team passed through a valley, they found it filled with fallen trees, indicating a recent mudslide. The team members were deeply shaken by the sight. They realized that if they hadn't detoured because of the elk, they might have been caught in the mudslide. Natalia often saw the elk in her dreams. She firmly believed that the reason she did not face the same danger as her mother was because this elk had saved her. In the interview, Valentina expressed that she didn't believe the mountaineering disaster was caused by their leader, Korovina. On the contrary, she described Korovina as a highly professional leader. Valentina mentioned that the team's daily meals were precisely calculated, and no one held any resentment towards Korovina. They also tried to light a campfire on the mountain, but due to the extremely harsh weather conditions, their attempts failed. As a result, they had no choice but to endure the cold throughout the night. Regarding the truth of the mountaineering disaster, even as a survivor, Valentina didn't fully understand what had caused it. She only knew how everyone around her had suddenly collapsed and died, but was unsure of the exact reasons behind it. The bizarre nature of the incident, with everyone seemingly dying in an instant, led both Valentina and Natalia to believe that the cause of the deaths was not hypothermia or neurotoxins, but rather some supernatural factors. Valentina suggested that perhaps people should show more reverence for nature and avoid disturbing the peace and harmony of the mountains and forests. As we conclude this episode, we are left with more questions than answers. The truth behind the Karma Daban tragedy remains elusive, shrouded in mystery and speculation. Whether it was due to natural causes, human error, or something beyond our understanding, the events of that fateful expedition continue to captivate and haunt us. Hachijo Island is located 287 kilometers south of Tokyo, Japan, in the waters of the Izu Islands. It covers an area of approximately 70 square kilometers and administratively affiliated with the Tokyo metropolis. To distinguish it from other nearby small islands, Hachijo Island is also referred to as Hachijo Oshima or Hachijo Main Island. On this island, there are two active volcanoes, East Mountain and West Mountain. Their elevations are 701 meters and 854 meters respectively. The island enjoys a warm climate year-round, earning its nickname Island of Eternal Spring. Many tourists visit the island to enjoy its hot springs and beaches. And today's story takes place on this beautiful island. In 1994, a strange and eerie incident occurred on this island. The case is full of mysteries and remains unsolved to this day. It is known as the Seven Skeletons Incident at the Hachijo Island Crematorium. On August 11, 1994, a Thursday, the weather on Hachijo Island was hot and humid. At 9 o'clock in the morning, a man named Okada arrived at the Hachijo Town Crematorium to start his workday. He had recently passed his probation period and had become a full-time employee at the crematorium. The population of Hachijo Island was relatively small with just over 6,000 residents, so the crematorium was not very busy and did not operate every day. According to the schedule, a funeral was booked for that day, so Okada began his preparations. He unlocked the main door and entered the crematorium building. Despite the bright sunshine outside, the interior felt somewhat cold and gloomy. Okada passed through the farewell room and walked to the cremator number 2, which was to be used that day. He then took out the key from his pocket and opened the cremator. To his surprise, inside was a large pile of partially incinerated human bones. There were so many bones that they were nearly overflowing from the cremator. If it were an ordinary person, they would have been terrified and collapsed to their knees, but Okada, having completed his probation period, was already accustomed to such sights. He was somewhat angry, thinking that another colleague had failed to clean it out in a timely manner. After all, no one likes to have their workload inexplicably increased and to do someone else's job. With this question in mind, he went to check the work records to see which irresponsible colleague had done this. However, after examining the records, he found that the last time cremator number 2 had been used was 5 days ago, on August 6th. So if cremator number 2 hadn't been used recently, how could there be so many bones inside? This struck him as very strange, because he remembered clearly that 5 days ago the cleaning of the cremator was done by his senior, Matsushima, and him together. They had cleaned it thoroughly that day, and in the following 4 days there was no records of cremator number 2 being used at all. Okada was very puzzled, so he went to ask his senior Matsushima about the situation. After hearing the details, Matsushima thought for a moment and suggested that perhaps another colleague had forgotten to record their use of the cremator. Matsushima and Okada then gathered the other colleagues, and after repeatedly verifying with them, everyone confirmed that they had not used cremator number 2 since August 6. According to the Cemetery, Burial and Other Matters Act, conducting cremations locally requires a formal application. However, the current situation clearly indicated that someone had used the cremator illegally without reporting it, which could involve a serious criminal case. The group immediately called the police. Upon receiving the report, the Hachijo Island police quickly dispatched officers to the scene. They collected and examined the evidence from the fragments of the bones found in the cremator number 2. Investigators first questioned Okada, the employee who discovered the scene. Okada firmly stated that when he arrived at work that morning, both the farewell room and cremator number 2 were locked, and the fuel valve of the cremator was also properly closed, with no signs of forced entry or tampering. Since the cremator had completely cooled down, the police speculated that cremator number 2 was used between August 7th and 9th. Next, investigators questioned the other employees of the crematorium. It was discovered that, including Okada, a total of 6 employees had keys to the crematorium's main door. However, strangely enough, All 6 of them had alibis for the period from August 7th to 10th. Since there were no signs of damage or tampering with the lock on the main door, the scene appeared to be a locked room mystery. How did the perpetrator manage to secretly bring the bodies into the cremator and then leave without a trace? The police considered one possibility, that someone other than the 6 employees with keys had stolen a key and made a copy. However, all 6 employees with keys stated that their keys had never been lost. Moreover, the crematorium was in a remote location with few employees. Everyone claimed that they hadn't seen any suspicious individuals around in the past few days. Up to this point, the police still considered the 6 employees with keys as the prime suspects. Perhaps one of them was lying and had forged an alibi. Returning to the scene at the crematorium, the amount of human bones in cremator number 2 was substantial, far more than one person's remains. All the partially burnt bones were crammed inside. There was no bone collection tray placed in the cremator, suggesting that the user did not understand the proper cremation process and had simply stuffed all the bones together. If that were the case, the 6 employees with keys could seemingly be ruled out as suspects. However, it's also possible that someone intentionally made it appear as if they did not know how to operate the cremator to mislead the police. Sometime later, the forensic examination results came back, revealing that these bones belonged to 7 different individuals, including both men and women and even a child, suggesting they might have been a family. Unfortunately, the DNA was completely destroyed by the incineration, so it was impossible to confirm any familial relationships among the deceased. Further analysis of the cremation residue revealed traces of soil. By analyzing the soil composition and other clues, the forensic experts deduced that the deaths of these 7 individuals occurred between 10 and 40 years ago, indicating that they had not died recently. The forensic results provided some relief to the police. Based on the time of death, this could be a case of reburial. So what is this reburial? Here we need to talk about the unique custom on Hachoji Island. In the past, people would place the deceased in a large coffin, which had a hole at the bottom for the soul of the deceased to enter and exit. The coffin would then be buried. And after 10 or more years, when the body had completely decomposed, people would take the bones out of the coffin, cremate them, and then rebury them on a specific day. This specific day was the Ghost Festival. However, this burial practice is no longer in use today, as all burials have been replaced by direct cremation. The day the incident occurred happened to be right before the Ghost Festival, one of Japan's grandest traditional holidays. Every year on August 13th, people in Japan visit cemeteries to welcome the spirits of their deceased relatives home for the holiday, and then they honor them at home. On August 15th, people carry lanterns at night to escort the spirits back to the cemetery. For the people of Hachoji Island, this festival is also the day for conducting the reburial ceremony. During the Ghost Festival, many businesses close for a week, allowing non-local employees to return to their hometowns for the holiday. This also provided the suspects with ample time to carry out their actions. Although this incident might be related to the reburial ceremony, there has never been a case of reburying 7 people at once on the island. This event is still full of mysteries. To identify these individuals, the police sent personnel to inspect the 64 cemeteries on the island, but none showed signs of recent excavation. If this is not a reburial, then it could be related to a heinous murder case from the past. The perpetrator may have hidden the bodies after committing the crime, and only now decided to cremate them to completely destroy the evidence. This is truly terrifying, considering that Hachijo Island has a population of just over 6,000 people, and now it involves 7 lives. Following this line of thought, the police speculated that if these were unsolved cases from the past, the 7 individuals would surely be recorded. They then reviewed nearly 40 years of records on missing persons and criminal cases, but found no incidents involving 7 people. Could it be that a serial killer had been lurking on the island, committing multiple murders with victims who had no apparent connection to each other, resulting in this situation? In other words, the killer might have been randomly murdering people on the island and hiding their bodies. However, in such a small island community, where even a single murder or disappearance would be a major event, how could there be no related records? Could it be that the killer transported the 7 bodies to the island for cremation from elsewhere? However, there are only 2 ways to reach Hachijo Island, by ship or by plane. It would be easy for port or airport staff to notice if someone were carrying that many bones onto the island. Moreover, outsiders unfamiliar with the island would likely expose themselves by attempting such a bold act. Despite the low probability, the police still reviewed recent ship and plane travel records. The island is 287 kilometers from Tokyo, taking 1 hour by plane and 10 hours by ship. All relevant staff were questioned by the police, but no one noticed anything suspicious. At this point in the investigation, the identities of the victims, the motive of the killer, and other crucial details remain unclear, and there are almost no valuable leads. The police are at a loss. With media coverage, the incident spread across Hachijo Island, and almost everyone on the island knew about it. Since the police did not disclose all the details, many people still believe that the 6 crematorium employees should be thoroughly investigated, including checking their bank transactions and interpersonal relationships. Some speculated that someone who couldn't afford the reburial ceremony privately commissioned an employee to handle the bodies, and for some unknown reason, the bones were left in the cremator. However, this theory doesn't hold much water. It is unlikely that an employee would risk breaking the law and losing their job to help with the cremation. If the family couldn't afford the reburial, they likely couldn't afford to bribe the employee either, making it hard to imagine how the family could persuade the employee to help. Following this, the public began to speculate about the origin of the 7 skeletons. Some suggested that the 7 individuals might have been illegal immigrants who had come to the island from elsewhere. In the past, there had indeed been incidents of smuggling and illegal immigration in the Izu Islands. The illegal immigrants might have chosen to land on Hachijo Island and worked illegally to repay their smuggling fees, which would explain why the police couldn't identify the 7 individuals through registered information. It is rumored that among the illegal immigrants from many years ago, 7 of them died while working. The gang responsible for managing the smuggling didn't care about these cheap laborers and hid the bodies indiscriminately, so it's reasonable that there will be no death records. However, this theory also has its flaws, as the bones included those of a child, and employers typically wouldn't use child labor. Some people believe that during the war, the Japanese military established a Kaiten torpedo base on Hachijo Island, and remnants of these structures remain on the island to this day. The 7 individuals could have been workers who accidentally died while building the base. In those chaotic times, the deaths of a few workers might have gone unnoticed. Another theory suggests that the bones came from a famine that once struck the island. To reduce food consumption, some families abandoned their elderly in a cave, leaving them to fend for themselves. This cave is called Hitosutiana in Japanese. It is said that long ago it was a hot spring, but it dried up and became a place for abandoning the elderly. After the cave was abandoned, it turned into a tourist attraction, and the bones inside were relocated and handled. However, this theory also fails to explain why there were the bones of a child. As the Hachijo Island crematorium incident spread, many people wanted to uncover the mystery. Some island residents reported that a few years ago, numerous billboards were erected along the roads and open spaces of Hachijo Island, even deep in the mountains and forests. These billboards numbered in the thousands and were from a surveying company. The company told locals that a certain piece of land would soon be developed, and buying it now would yield substantial profits. Using this kind of rhetoric, they induced people to buy worthless land at high prices. The billboards also displayed a real estate broker's license number, but in reality, these were forged and did not exist. This is an illegal business engaged in fraudulent activities. It operates not only on Hachijo Island, but also in many other regions. Some speculate that this company inadvertently unearthed human bones while surveying the land. To avoid affecting the sale of the land, they chose to remain silent. Those who disagree with this view argue that the surveying company had no reason to conceal this and should have reported it to the police at the time. Even if they had hidden it, they wouldn't wait decades to deal with it. That would be creating trouble out of nothing. Among the various viewpoints, there is one particular unique perspective regarding religion. In the year the incident occurred, many people were fervent about religion. At that time, there was a large religious group that opposed modern medicine and advocated for natural remedies. Within the religion, a ritual was performed where believers sat face to face, holding their palms above the other person's hands, believing this method would purify the soul. When someone fell ill, they would place their hands on the affected area for 10 minutes, using spiritual power to heal. Many people on the island had experiences of being stopped by elders who would say, "Let me pray for your health and happiness." Then the elder would raise their hand above the person's head and ask them to close their eyes. After a few minutes, the elder would tell them that there was something impure inside their body, essentially implying that they should join the religious group. 4 months before this incident, in April 1994, the sensational Inokashira Park dismemberment case occurred in Japan. We can talk about that case in more detail later. At that time, many people suspected that a religious organization was behind the crime. Since these two events happened not long apart, many people linked them together, believing that the 7 human bones found at the crematorium belonged to followers of that religious group. They had fallen ill, and the rituals of the organization failed to cure them. To maintain their reputation and prevent other believers from wavering, the organization secretly buried them and only recently exhumed and cremated bodies during the Ghost Festival. Gradually, the incident became known not only to the people on Hachijo Island, but also to many outsiders. A man named Ogawa Toyoaki took notice of the Hachijo incident and recalled experience he had years ago on the island with friends. It was the summer of 1985. 22-year-old Ogawa Toyoaki, along with 6 companions, a total of 7 people, arrived on Hachijo Island. At the time, Ogawa was a 3rd-year student at Tokyo University of Agriculture and had a passion for orchids. He had previously visited Hachijo to study some plants. This time, they went to the southern part of the island to observe a type of orchid known as the pink spiral orchid. Ogawa had interned at a farm on the island before, so the farm owner warmly welcomed the 7 visitors from off the island and even invited them to enjoy the hot springs. As night fell, Ogawa and his companions set up tents at the foot of the mountain behind the farm, close to the owner's residence. Once the tents were pitched, everyone soon fell asleep exhausted. After an unknown period, a sudden shout came from outside. Ogawa awoke from his dream and stepped out of the tent to check the situation. Finding that everyone else was awake as well, they all gathered together. A few of the companions were very frightened, saying they felt someone had just touched their heads. One brave companion wasn't too concerned, suggesting it might have been a hallucination, and that they should just go back to sleep. It was already midnight, and an eerie atmosphere pervaded the silence. The nearby farm owner noticed the commotion at the tents and came over with a flashlight to inquire about what had happened. The group recounted their recent experience. Upon hearing it, the owner seemed to understand something immediately. He invited everyone to spend the night at his house instead of sleeping in the tents. He added mysteriously that today was the Ghost Festival. When Ogawa heard the mention of the Ghost Festival, he roughly understood that it had to do with spirits. Everyone went inside, and the owner turned on the lights and shared the legend of Hachijo Island. According to the legend, long ago, 7 monks encountered a disaster at sea, and their boat drifted to Hachijo. Unexpectedly, the island's residents refused to help them, fearing that they might carry infectious diseases and suspecting they might use strange spells. The 7 monks faced rejection everywhere. Initially frightened, the villagers grew angry and picked up tools to drive the monks to the nearby South Mountain, forbidding them from coming down the mountain. They even posted guards at the mountain's pass to prevent them from coming down. The 7 monks were thus trapped in the desolate wilderness, and when they got hungry, they could only eat wild fruits. After a period of time, they died of starvation one after another. The villagers guarding the mountain saw no movement for several days and didn't go up the mountain to check. Instead, they each returned home. After the monks passed away, strange things began to happen in this area. Livestock in some villagers' homes suddenly fell ill. Crops failed, and food gradually became a problem. People reported seeing monks in white robes at night with their spirits wandering around East Mountain. Some villagers even mysteriously died on East Mountain. The series of eerie events made the villagers fearful, believing that the vengeful spirits of the 7 monks were seeking retribution. After discussing, the villagers decided to go up East Mountain together to find the bodies of the 7 monks and give them a proper burial, hoping their spirits would then forgive the villagers. However, after searching the mountain, they couldn't find the monks' bodies. So they erected tombstones for the 7 monks on the East Mountain and began to make daily offerings and prayers. Gradually, the strange occurrences ceased, but since then, the number 7 has become an ominous number on the island. There is a long-standing rumor on the island that if you walk outside on the night of the Ghost Festival, you will encounter the 7 monks and might even be cursed by the spirits. The owner vividly and emotionally recounted the island's legend to Ogawa and his companions. Everyone felt a chill after hearing the story, and those who had felt their heads being touched were even more frightened. Moreover, the group that came to the island happened to be number 7, and they began to wonder if they were unlucky enough to encounter the ghosts of the 7 monks who were counting the numbers. Thus, they spent a fearful night in the owner's house. At dawn, they bid farewell to the owner and later safely left Hachijo. The people on the island all knew the legend of the 7 monks, but it was difficult to understand why the villagers harbored such deep resentment towards them, leading to their tragic deaths. A folklorist recorded an event in his book Folklore and the Society of Hachijo Island that shed some light on this. In the year 1711 AD, a shipwrecked vessel drifted to Hachijo. The surviving sailors came ashore, and the islanders extended a helping hand. Unfortunately, one of the sailors was infected with smallpox, which quickly spread after their arrival, disrupting the generations of peaceful life on the island. To prevent the disease from spreading further, the local government ordered the killing of all infected individuals, including children. This disaster lasted until the fall of the following year, claiming 990 lives. Since then, the island's residents developed a deep hatred for outsiders, fearing they would bring calamities again. They built fences around their homes and refused to accommodate anyone from outside the island. It is perhaps due to this historical trauma that the 7 monks were so harshly rejected and met their tragic end. This piece of folklore has made the legend of the 7 monks deeply ingrained in the hearts of the people. Some believe that the Hachijo crematorium's 7-bone incident is related to this legend. A resident living near the crematorium reported seeing a pale flame rising into the sky, resembling a Buddha's light the day before the bones were discovered. According to the legend, in November 1952, 8 workers were building a forest road in an area on the island. During their work, they discussed the island's legend of the 7 monks. The workers didn't believe in the ghosts and spirits, and one of them jokingly said that if the ghosts of the 7 monks truly existed, they should come and take his life. A landslide occurred on the forest road and buried all 8 men just as he finished speaking. Although rescue teams quickly arrived, only 1 person was saved. Strangely, no matter how hard they searched, the other 7 were never found, and there was no further news of them. The newspapers at the time reported this news, and people felt it was not a coincidence, but a punishment from the 7 monks for people's misdeeds. Some villagers claimed to have seen monks in robes on the forest road near the landslide site. Since the 7 workers were never found, after the discovery of the 7 bones at the crematorium, some speculated that the bones belonged to those buried workers. However, this theory was not convincing, as police findings showed that the bones included those of men, women, and children, making it impossible for them to be the remains of the 7 workers. The number 7 holds special significance on Hachijo, and the legend of the 7 monks and the story of the 7 workers have made islanders particularly sensitive to this number. After these events, more urban legends were brought up by the islanders. In ancient times, due to its remote location, Hachijo was used as a place of exile. A monk named Jin Yunhuang was exiled there for his crimes. Though he maintained his innocence, he eventually died from a hunger strike. On the 7th day after his death, 2 sago palms in front of his grave bloomed. At the same time, his pardon order arrived on the island, but it was too late. The islanders called these 2 sago palm flowers the pardon flowers, believing they symbolized good fortune. There is another story related to number 7. One day in 1753, 8 criminals were exiled to the island. Seeing how remote this island was, they thought that even if something happened, no one would intervene. So they developed an evil plan to kill all the residents and take over the entire island. During their plotting, a man named Chobei refused to go along with the others. He had fallen in love with a local woman and wanted to stay on the island and live a good life, not wanting to see his lover and her family harmed. So he revealed the criminal's plan to the villagers. Upon hearing this, the villagers gathered together, captured the other 7 criminals, and beheaded them. The villagers thus eliminated the threat and accepted Chobei. It is said that the bones of those 7 criminals were discarded near what is now the airport. There is also a legend on Hachijo about the 7 Lords of the Wake. It is said that 7 elders, known as the 7 Lords of the Wake, once lived on the peak of the East Mountain, where the 7 monks died. One day, a mother encountered a passerby who told her that her child would pass away before turning 16. The passerby said the only way to prevent this was to visit the 7 Lords of the Wake on the East Mountain. no mother would risk her child's life, so she chose to believe the advice. She hurried to the east mountain, and during her prayers, she seemed to hear instructions from the 7 lords of the wake, telling her to offer pastries. The mother then went down the mountain and brought back 88 sticky rice cakes as offerings. Her child eventually lived to be 88 years old. Some believe that the 7 lords of the wake the mother prayed to were actually the 7 monks from the legend, given that both resided on the east mountain and the number of individuals was the same. These legends inevitably lead to associations, making the crematorium 7-bone incident increasingly eerie and expanding its influence beyond Hachijo Island. Some people link it to another tale involving the number 7, the 7 people Misaki. According to this legend, 7 drowned spirits appear near the sea or rivers, and anyone who encounters them will die from an unrelenting high fever. The 7 spirits line up, and each time they kill a person, the spirit at the front of the line can attain Buddhahood and leave the group. The newly killed person then becomes the new spirit, taking the last position in the lineup. This cycle continues perpetually, maintaining the group of 7 spirits. Interestingly, different regions in Japan have their own versions of the origin of these 7 spirits, with one tracing back to the Sengoku period in Japan. The 7 people Misaki ghost story and the legend of the 7 monks seem to share only the number 7 in common. However, some observant individuals notice that Nakanogo, the village where the 7 monks were driven out, is located on the cape of Hachijo, and the 7 people Misaki often appears near the sea. Therefore, some people believe that the 7 people Misaki is actually the 7 monks. Although there are many urban legends on the island, clues about the crematorium 7-bone incident are scarce, and it remains an unsolved case. After the incident, the victims' identities could not be confirmed, so the urns were marked with numbers instead of names. In the second year after the incident, the 7 bones were handed over to the city government and reburied by the welfare department. The truth of the incident was buried forever beneath the memorial tower along with the 7 bones. And that wraps up today's story. If you enjoy my storytelling style, click subscribe to follow me. I share intriguing tales and real-life cases. Thank you, and see you next time. As the mushroom cloud rose over the Japanese homeland, hundreds of thousands perished in the explosion, and the bombed area was flattened completely. This catastrophe added insult to injury for Japan, plunging the nation into such dire strait that people faced the grim reality of committing crimes to avoid starvation. Today's story unfolds against this harrowing backdrop. Hello everyone, this is Cat Archive. I'm Kat. A rural woman with only 4 years of schooling possessed a sharp business acumen. In an area where people struggle to fill their stomachs, she amassed over 3 million yen in just 3 years. Not only was she skilled at making money, but she was also quite attractive, often catching the eyes of passing men. This woman, known as the Showa Poison Woman, became infamous and was the first woman executed in post-war Japan. Her notoriety was unparalleled. So, what exactly happened back then? Let's travel back to early 20th century Japan to revisit the details of this notorious case. Saitama Prefecture, located in the central part of Japan's Kanto region, is an inland area that borders Tokyo to the south. It's a vital part of the greater Tokyo area. Historically, Saitama was a typical agricultural region, with its crops supplying Tokyo for generations. Our story today unfolds in this very place. Our protagonist, Kahane Kobayashi, was born in 1908 in Tama Village, Osato District, Saitama Prefecture. She was the fifth of 7 children in a large rural family. The region where her family lived had scarce arable land, making it extremely difficult to sustain a household of 9. The phrase barely making ends meet perfectly described her family's situation, and Kahane's childhood was marked by extreme poverty. Due to their financial struggles, she attended school for only 4 years before having to drop out to help at home. She took care of her younger siblings while also handling household chores and farm work. Perhaps due to the endless chores, Kahane was often irritable and gradually developed a domineering personality, frequently quarreling with her siblings. Once, when the family managed to cook a rare meal with meat, Kahane was so upset about getting a smaller portion that she threw a tantrum and overturned the entire dish. Besides her bad temper, she despised her background, feeling ashamed of her farmer parents. She often lied, claiming to be friends with the wealthy young people in the village and boasting about how well they got along. But in reality, this was far from the truth. The impoverished family and endless farm work made her yearn for the leisurely life of the rich. At 16, despite her family's objections, Kahane set off alone to Tokyo to make a living. With little education, she could only find work as a housekeeper in a hotel. Here, she encountered a lifestyle completely different from that of farmers. Kahane was quick-witted and soon learned the ways of the world. Her desire for wealth grew stronger, setting the stage for the events that would unfold in her future. At that time, Japanese society was not open-minded, and most women could not freely choose their marriage partners. Arranged marriages were the norm, with families making decisions on behalf of their daughters. Kahane was no exception, and suffered greatly from this societal constraint. In 1930, at the age of 22, Kahane was arranged by her family to marry 27-year-old Suzuki Kobayashi. Despite his young age, Suzuki was frail and sickly, suffering from chronic gonorrhea. Their married life was far from harmonious. She harbored deep resentment towards their situation, but could only swallow her anger. After all, it was a time when men ruled the household, and women had little say in anything. A year after their marriage, their son was born, but soon he passed away. The following year, they had a daughter. Although they were not wealthy, they managed to live a stable life, supported by a small grocery store they ran. However, their relative peace was short-lived as the horrors of war began. Despite his frail health, Kahane's husband was also sent to the battlefield. In 1945, following Japan's defeat, the emperor announced the country's unconditional surrender. The surviving men returned home from the war. Although Suzuki Kobayashi, frail as he was, came back physically intact, he suffered from severe mental issues, becoming increasingly fragile and violent and developing a drinking problem. He abandoned his work, leaving all responsibilities to Kahane. However, Kahane didn't mind too much, as she had been the one holding the family together for many years. She loved the money and thoroughly enjoyed the business of making it. Her mind was consumed with one goal: making money. Post-defeat Japan was in chaos, with extreme shortages of essential goods. The ruling authorities hoarded scarce resources, selling them on the black market for enormous profits, which caused the prices to skyrocket. Ordinary people suffered immensely, with many even starving to death. But in stark contrast, Kahane's business thrived. She engaged in the resale of bicycles, sold pickles, and various local specialties, including Saitama's renowned Fujiyabao. Amid the turmoil, Kahane's sharp mind and business acumen allowed her to accumulate significant savings. But misfortune struck again. On October 2nd, 1952, at the age of 44, Kahane's husband, Shusuke, suddenly died of a brain hemorrhage. The young police officer she had been pursuing, Nakamura, abandoned her 2 years later. Even her only daughter severed ties with her early on. In middle age, Kahane found herself utterly alone. Seek to escape her sorrows, she moved to Natsushiobara in Tochigi Prefecture. This area not only boasted beautiful scenery, but also numerous hot springs. With her romantic endeavors in shambles, Kahane threw herself into making money. Using her savings and the business acumen she had honed over the years, she opened a souvenir shop. Her business flourished remarkably. The following year, she expanded her ventures by opening a restaurant, which also became a huge success. In just 3 years, she amassed 3 million yen, a significant fortune at the time. To onlookers, Kahane appeared to be a formidable businesswoman and a success story, having built her wealth from scratch and achieving financial freedom early on. However, her rapid success also aroused suspicion among some. People whispered behind her back, questioning how someone who hadn't even finished elementary school could earn so much money. They noted her heavy makeup, flashy attire, and widow status, concluding that her money must have come from dubious means. As the saying goes, good news never leaves the house, while bad news spreads far and wide. These rumors quickly circulated in the local area, tarnishing Kahane's reputation. However, she remained unfazed, as her ultimate dream of owning a hot spring hotel was within reach. After extensive scouting, she set her sights on the Nihon Inn, a hotel that had been open for just 2 years, but was already in financial trouble due to poor management. The hotel's owner, Kensuke, was desperately seeking funds to solve his debt problems. Wealthy and determined, Kahane planned to invest and become a shareholder in the Nihon Inn. However, shortly after they began discussing the partnership, the hotel owner's wife mysteriously disappeared. At 52, Kahane took over as the new mistress of the inn, investing heavily in its renovation. Just as she was basking in the joy of her success, disaster struck. It turned out that the Nihon Inn was deeply in debt and was about to be auctioned off. In reality, Kahane had been deceived by the hotel owner Kensuke and found herself facing a devastating betrayal. In a bizarre twist, on New Year's Eve in 1960, Kensuke mysteriously disappeared just like his wife. This incident further fueled the rumors among the local residents. Some had already speculated that Kahane had been behind the disappearance of the inn's previous mistress, allegedly burying her body beneath the hotel's boiler room. Now, with Kensuke's sudden vanishing, suspicions grew stronger that Kahane aimed to seize the hotel for herself. However, there were also those who sympathized with her, seeing her as a woman of misfortune who had lost her money and now had to deal with the mess left at the Nihon Inn, which was no easy task. The police took the matter seriously and launched an investigation. To their astonishment, they uncovered not just 1, but 3 murder cases. People often joke that the most profitable methods are written in the law books. The reason Kahane made so much money was because it was all ill-gotten gains. When her husband Shusuke's mental health began to deteriorate, she began employing her own methods. She sold her body to anyone willing to accept her offer, be it street vendors or utility bill collectors. As long as the creditors were willing, she was happy to provide special services to settle debts. Her rationale was that, as long as she didn't have to pay for sex, she was already fortunate. Of course, this method was just a way to cut costs. The real money came from the black market. At that time, Japan strictly prohibited the private sale of essential goods like rice and sugar. Kahane saw this as an opportunity. While she outwardly ran a grocery store, she was secretly selling these banned items. Just as she was making a fortune, the police came knocking. In those days, everyone was struggling, so her success naturally aroused suspicion. The officer sent to investigate was Nakamura, a 25-year-old who was young, handsome, and well-built. Kahane saw an opportunity. Her daughter was grown, and she thought if she could groom this officer into a son-in-law, she would have someone in the legitimate world to cover her activities, allowing her to continue her black market dealings without a hitch and keep the money flowing. As expected, under the lure of bribery, Nakamura quickly succumbed. He did not report Kahane's illicit activities. As they grow closer over time, their relationship unexpectedly blossomed. One was a wealthy woman, and the other a young man, with an age difference of 18 years. It became a mutually consensual affair, driven by both emotions and transactions. Kahane, now fully satisfied, threatened Nakamura, saying, "If you dare abandon me, I will report you to the police." With Nakamura's protection, Kahane's business thrived, and the two of them continued to have frequent, in-depth interactions. At that time, Kahane's husband, Shusuke, was still alive. It wasn't long before he discovered his wife's affair. Such a revelation was a grave humiliation for any man. Shusuke began to monitor Kahane closely, preventing her from seeing Nakamura and occasionally subjecting her to domestic violence. He vehemently opposed Kahane's requests for a divorce, fully aware that if they separated, he would be left helpless and destitute. For Kahane and Nakamura, this situation was deeply frustrating as they were constantly watched and had no opportunity to be together. One day, Kahane and Nakamura finally managed to meet. After their usual interactions, they began to discuss their predicament. "Is there any way we can be together openly?" Kahane asked. "If he were out of the picture, everything would be perfect." As soon as the words were spoken, they exchanged a knowing glance. An evil idea took root, and this dark plan marked Kahane's irreversible descent onto a path of no return. On October 2nd, 1952, Shusuke had a slight cold. It's said that when he was drinking, he noticed a strange taste but still drank it all. He soon died from poisoning. Neighbors speculated that since Shusuke had just discovered the affair, Kahane must have had something to do with his death. However, the coroner's examination concluded that Shusuke had died of a brain hemorrhage. Given Shusuke's frail health and chronic illnesses, people did not pursue the matter further, assuming it was not Kahane's doing. After her husband's death, Kahane finally moved in with Nakamura. However, Nakamura was only interested in her money and had no intention of marrying a woman old enough to be his mother. Their relationship eventually came to the attention of Nakamura's superiors, and coupled with his other corrupt activities, he was reported and lost his job as a police officer. 2 years later, Nakamura had had enough. He married a younger woman and kicked Kahane out. This devastated Kahane, and she frantically pounded on Nakamura's door, begging him to take her back. She even threatened to poison his new wife. But Nakamura remained unmoved, shamelessly continuing to accept money from Kahane despite their broken relationship. It's said that Nakamura kicked Kahane out not only because of her age and the murder suspicion surrounding her, but also because of a repulsive incident that occurred while they were living together. One night, Nakamura came home completely drunk and vomited before passing out. The next morning, he woke up to find Kahane had prepared breakfast. She lovingly brought him a bowl of rice porridge. But as Nakamura took a closer look, he realized the bowl seemed to contain his vomit from the previous night. He nearly threw up again and was furious, but before he could lash out, Kahane started eating it herself. This incident, along with the lingering fear of her past involving her husband's suspicious death, terrified Nakamura. He feared he might suffer the same fate as Shusuke, so he hastily decided to expel Kahane from his life. After her romantic failures, Kahane soon moved to Nasushiobara. There, she opened a shop and continued offering special services, secretly selling adult products and erotic photos. Sometimes she even slept with customers to keep them coming back. Additionally, she began lending money at high interest rates to local residents. These ventures allowed her to earn millions annually. Afterward, Kahane set her sights on the Nihon Inn, but her negotiations with the hotel owner Kensuke did not go smoothly. Initially, Kahane wanted to buy the hotel, but Kensuke was adamantly against the selling. He believed the hotel's poor performance was due to his wife, Kome, who he claimed didn't do housework and was incompetent at managing the hotel. Kensuke proposed divorcing his wife and making Kahane the new mistress, convinced that the hotel would thrive under her management. He offered Kome a 500,000 yen severance package and planned to marry Kahane. Although 500,000 yen wasn't a large sum for Kahane, she had no intention of letting Kensuke spend that money. One day, while out with Kensuke, Kahane suggested, "If we get rid of your wife, you could save the 500,000 yen. That money could be put to better use." Unbelievably, in a moment of poor judgment, Kensuke agreed. Another version of the story claims that during negotiations over the severance package, Kahane managed to lower the amount to 300,000 yen, which Kome refused, leading to a breakdown in negotiations. Regardless of the reason, Kome had become a target. Kahane began to plot her elimination. Kahane didn't want to get her hands dirty, so she decided to use Unuki, an employee at the Nihon Inn. Unuki had previously been a homeless drifter, coming from a poor background. He had an honest, unassuming appearance and was known for his hard work. Despite being 36 years old, he had hardly any experience with women. After a few days of interaction, Kahane concluded that Unuki was the perfect tool for her plan. She believed she could easily manipulate him using her charms. One day, Kahane approached Unuki, calling his name softly and lifting the hem of her kimono. Tucked between her thighs were several large denomination bills. Overwhelmed by the temptation, Unuki instantly fell for Kahane's seduction and agreed to all her demands. Kahane promised him that, in addition to a 20,000 yen fee, he would also be allowed to embrace her as he wished once the job was done. Without hesitation, Unuki agreed to the plan. On February 8, 1960, Unuki took advantage of Kome's sleep to strangle her with a rope. In a chilling display of callousness, Kahane brought alcohol to Kome's lifeless body, celebrating the act with Unuki. She removed the tortoiseshell comb Kome had been wearing and placed it in her own hair, remarking how much a fine item shouldn't go to waste. This comb would later become crucial evidence leading to her arrest. Finally, they went to the boiler room, dug up the floor, and hid the body, covering it with cement. In theory, only the three of them knew about the crime. But why were the neighbors' rumors so accurate? It turned out that after his wife's death, Kensuke's mental state deteriorated. he began telling others that Kahane had murdered Kome and hidden her body under the boiler room. This terrified both Kahane and Unuki. Terrified by Kensuke's revelations, they dug up Kome's body in the middle of the night and reburied it in the woods. After dealing with the remains, Kahane invested 2 million yen to renovate the hotel. However, she soon discovered that Kensuke had deceived her and the 2 million yen had gone to waste. Enraged, she ordered Unuki to eliminate Kensuke using the same method, poisoning. The first attempt failed when Kensuke smelled something off in his sake and miso soup during the meal. Frightened, he refused to eat or drink and fled the house. With the plan foiled, Kahane decided to take a more direct approach. On New Year's Eve in 1960, after dinner, Kahane brought tea into tatami room where Kensuke and Unuki were. Seizing a moment of distraction, Kahane and Unuki looped a rope around Kensuke's neck and together strangled him. They then buried his body beneath the hotel corridor. With Kensuke gone, Kahane quickly turned her attention to Unuki. She felt he knew too much and, given his lack of intelligence, was likely to expose their crimes eventually. Deciding that he had to go as well, she planned to eliminate him. Just as Kahane was contemplating how to eliminate him, the police arrived first. Thanks to the suspicions of the neighbors, the successive mysterious disappearances of the Nihon Inn's proprietress and owner naturally led the neighbors to suspect Kahane. Despite her claims that Kensuke had gone to Tokyo to make money, no one believed her, and they notified the police. The tortoiseshell comb that Kahane had taken was a precious item given to Kome by her mother, and Kome had always worn it with great care. Seeing such an important item in Kahane's possession, the police arrested her for questioning. Simultaneously, the police also apprehended Unuki, who immediately confessed to the murders of Kensuke and Kome. Kahane, on the other hand, initially refused to admit to any crimes, attempting to use her charms to distract and sway others. However, with Unuki's confession, Kahane couldn't maintain her facade and eventually confessed. The case of the missing Nihon Inn couple was thus solved. As the case received widespread media coverage, the investigation department was suddenly flooded with anonymous letters. These letters repeatedly mentioned the suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of Kahane's husband Shusuke years earlier. The writers claimed with certainty that he had been murdered by Kahane. During the ongoing police investigation, Kahane unexpectedly confessed, revealing that she had poisoned her husband with potassium cyanide. She also implicated her former lover, the policeman Nakamura, as her accomplice. Nakamura was subsequently arrested as well. With the widespread dissemination of the case details, people began referring to Kahane as the Showa Poison Woman, a moniker that spread her infamy throughout Japan. In August 1963, the Tochigi Prefecture District Court found Kahane and Unuki guilty of murder. Kahane was the mastermind and was sentenced to death, while Unuki received a life sentence. Kahane's former lover, the policeman Nakamura, maintained his innocence throughout the trial and was ultimately acquitted due to the insufficient evidence. However, he was sentenced to 1 year in prison for illegal possession of firearms. Following the trial, the police filed an appeal. In September 1965, the Tokyo High Court retried the case and sentenced both Kahane and Unuki to death, while Nakamura received a 10-year prison sentence. Although they appealed, the Supreme Court ultimately rejected their appeals. Notably, during the trial, Kahane meticulously groomed herself, attempting to charm the judges. convinced that her gender would save her. She had a peculiar confidence in being a woman, famously saying, "I won't be executed because I'm a woman. No woman has ever been executed before, right? I will be paroled in 10 years, so I'm living well now." Even after the death sentence was finalized, she believed there was a chance for a reduced sentence. She even coquettishly told the prison guards, "The death penalty is not acceptable, you know." However, her behavior only fueled public disdain. Kahane was seen as selfish and callous, treating human lives with utter disregard and never showing remorse for her actions. On June 10, 1970, the warden informed Kahane that she would be executed the following day. She still couldn't comprehend the reality of her situation. After consuming her final meal of sushi, Kahane was executed on June 11, 1970, becoming the first woman to be executed in post-war Japan. However, it is noteworthy that Kahane was not the first woman sentenced to death in post-war Japan. In 1951, Hiroko, a mother of 7, was overwhelmed by her debts and unable to repay them. When she approached a creditor couple for a loan, they humiliated her, saying, "No money? Can't you sell yourself?" These insults drove Hiroko to commit a desperate act. She broke into the creditor's home, murdered the wife, and set the house on fire to destroy the evidence. The husband succumbed to his injuries a few days later. Hiroko was arrested and sentenced to death on December 26, 1949. While in prison, Hiroko converted to Jodo Shinsu Buddhism, converting herself to her faith and expressing deep remorse for her crimes. Given her motives, her genuine repentance, and the fact that she was suffering from mental illness, the government decided to grant her clemency. This marked the first post-war commutation of a death sentence, reducing her punishment to life imprisonment. In stark contrast to Hiroko's case is the infamous female serial poisoning case. On November 6, 1960, Sujimura, burdened with a debt of 160,000 yen, chose a dark and irreversible path. She laced her mother-in-law's favorite lactic acid drink with pesticide, killing her when she came to visit. To Sujimura's dismay, her mother-in-law had no money on her, leading to great disappointment. The mother-in-law's death was diagnosed as a stroke, allowing Sujimura's crime to go undetected. The following month, on the 14th, Sujimura visited a neighbor and poisoned her using insecticide-laced horse meat, only to find that the neighbor's family was even poorer. After searching their home, she found no money and left empty-handed once again. Just 3 days later, she poisoned another acquaintance by adding pesticide to miso soup, stealing 13,500 yen. This time, the victim didn't die but became comatose due to the smaller dose of poison. 11 days later, Sujimura poisoned yet another friend, this time successfully killing them and stealing a mere 15 yen. Subsequently, the police found high concentrations of pesticides in Sujimura's miso soup and other food items at her home, indicating her intent to continue her crimes, as she had clearly become addicted to this lethal method. On March 28, 1963, she was sentenced to death, becoming the second woman to receive the death penalty in post-war Japan. Sujimura was executed on September 19, 1970, making her the second woman to be executed after the Nihon-in case. A well-known writer noted that Kahane was different from other female criminals. Many women who commit serious crimes often do so under the influence and direction of others or due to impulsive emotional reactions. Kahane, however, relied entirely on her own judgment, orchestrating crimes and even manipulating others to commit them. If she hadn't been apprehended in time, she could have committed many more murders. This case was later adapted into the movie Station to Heaven. The film's content, artistically altered, portrays Kahane as a woman tormented by love. Interested viewers can watch the movie to see this interpretation. And that wraps up today's story. If you enjoy my storytelling style, click subscribe to follow me. I share intriguing tales and real-life cases. Thank you, and see you next time.